In today's video, I will be testing every single super as of Lightfall's release in Destiny 2. Which is some pretty great timing considering that I recorded all of the supers and started writing the script, then Bungie announced that they are going to be buffing a crap ton of supers in Season of the Deep. So as to not make this video completely irrelevant in 2 weeks, I will be addressing the changes as they are relevant. If a super has a change that makes it better, I'll let you know. As for my guinea pig for today, this will be Perseus, seeing as he is a big, slow-moving target that takes more damage from supers, so it is actually kind of practical to use supers against him. Debuff will be Tractor Cannon to simulate a tether. I will also be comparing instant cast and roaming supers separately so as not to get numbers mixed up. Instant cast supers get their damage from being able to use your weapons afterwards, so the lack of damage in some cases can be kind of made up. That really isn't the case for roaming supers. This video is already going to be pretty damn long, so let's skip the intro and head on to our first contender. We're going to be starting with instant cast supers, then move on to roaming boys, and I think it's only fair to start with the OG damage super, the Nova Bomb. While its functions are different from D1, the general idea is exactly the same. Throw a big ball, do big damage. There are two versions, Vortex and Cataclysm. Unfortunately, for both versions, Nova Bomb is lacking in the big damage department. Cataclysm, which is considered to be the highest damage of the two, is only around 400,000 damage. Cataclysm also has the added functionality of magnetically attracting to any teammate within a 50-mile radius.
I hit Tusky.
So that's fun. What about Vortex? Not great. Even after throwing everything I could at him to make him stagger, he would just walk out of the vortex, so the damage was negligible at best and downright offensive at worst. Some would say that you can make up the damage with your guns, so it's not that bad, and I would typically agree if Needle Storm and any other super in the game didn't exist. Needle Storm, similar to Nova Bomb, is a very fast instant cast super, so it's only fair to compare the two as they are in the same league. However, Needle Storm has something that Nova Bomb doesn't: Threadlings. Threadlings are the after effect of casting the super, and with the Thread of Evolution aspect, they will do more damage. Add on your rifts and Threadling nades, and you get some pretty goddamn funky results. By spamming Threadlings and casting our supers, we got around 740,000 damage. Granted, some of that damage is from the Tractor Cannon, so let's just round it down to 700k just to be safe. Now, some would say it really isn't a fair test because we're using Threadlings and not just the super, and you'd be kinda right, though I do figure that if you're using your super, you should have all of your tools at your disposal as well, but I can see how that would kind of affect performance a bit. So I went off and did a quick run with just the super after being arrow coded like a million times, and the damage is within the range of 400,000 to 450,000. Still 100k better than the best Nova Bomb option. Even with this thing being scuffed as I got a couple immunes and my projectiles just went behind him, it still managed to pull ahead of the Nova Bomb just by a significant margin. Thankfully, Nova Bomb does have some sort of saving grace, with it receiving a 20% damage buff at the beginning of Season of Rolling Down in the Deep. So that would put it in around the range of 480k to 500k. So not great, but definitely better than what it is. Moving on from Nova Bomb, we've got Chaos Reach. This one is interesting, seeing as it has an exotic that directly impacts how good the super can actually be, that being Geomag Stabilizers. Geomags allows your super to refund its energy mid-cast to give you more duration on the super itself. This basically doubles the amount of damage you can do. In a test with no Geomag Stabilizers, I did 350,000 damage, and with Geomag, I did 700,000. So yeah, it's pretty much double. Some even more juicy details: the super is getting buffed by a whopping 25%. That is some insanely overkill damage buffs. Add some storm nades and junk and you're in for a crispy meal. Now, there is something to mention about the super that will make it probably less viable for some situations. It just takes too long. It's around 10 full seconds to drain your super with Geomags, so in a short DPS window that can take a lot out of it, but nowadays we have DPS windows 25 to like 35 seconds, so that's becoming less of an issue nowadays. Moving on to our final instant cast Warlock super, Well of Radiance. It did 8,000 damage. Moving on. Next up, we have our good Titans. Titans only have 2 instant cast supers. Let's start with Bubble. 3, 2, 1. Insane damage! Wow! Alright, now let's go to Thunder Crash. Thunder Crash, similarly to Geomag, has an exotic that directly affects the damage of the super, this being Kuros of the Falling Star. This exotic used to have the functionality of, depending on the distance of your Thunder Crash, you could actually gain increased damage, but Bungie made a change to that, seeing as flying in circles around a boss wasn't exactly practical, so they just gave it a flat double damage to the super when equipped. So, makes my job easier, I guess. Damage came up within the range of 660,000 to 700,000, this being kind of due to the shock waves cast by the super and needing the boss to actually stand in it without moving. So there's a bit of inconsistency there, but if you just throw a storm nade or a pulse nade, you should be fine to make up whatever damage you lost. So we'll just keep it at a conservative estimate of 650, 700,000, something like that. Something a little off topic. Can we please get a different instant cast super for Titans? Please, Bungie? Pretty please? Anyways, onto Hunters. We're going to start with Gathering Storm, as it's kind of cemented itself as the damage super for Hunters. This is all because of Star Eater's scales, giving a stupid amount of damage to every super that Hunters have. That being a 70% damage buff to any super when you pick up 2 Orbs of Power. So basically, all the fucking time. To make sure we've covered all of our bases when testing Hunters, we did tests with and without Star Eaters. Thankfully, my brother, who doesn't have any exotics, is perfect for this. And after testing, I'm honestly pretty shocked. Get it? It's a joke. Due to the jolting effect the super has when sticking the javelin into a target, it does not stack when multiple javelins are on the same enemy. However, the super does 850,000 damage with Star Eater scales. Basically, anything damage related needs Star Eaters to be remotely effective. I sure do love power creep. Moving off of Arc, we're moving on to Solar. We're going to start with the closest contender to Gathering Storm, that being Blade Barrage. Before Gathering Storm, BB was some of the best super damage you can get in the game for literal years, so how does it shake up now? Turns out, shakes up better than Gathering Storm. 900k, even after hitting immunes for some of the knives using Star Eater scales. I will mention that Blade Barrage can be pretty inconsistent, especially with your knife tracking, so Ember of Beams might be necessary to get all your knives to land. Overall though, Blade Barrage, top of the board. Very, very good. Moving to the OG DPS super, that being Golden Gun. Any hunter ever has been using this for damage since Destiny 1, so how does it work now? Is it actually good? Golden Gun has both Star Eater scales and Celestial Nighthawk for what exotics you can use to improve your damage, so we'll be using the same system as before. Field will run Celestial and Desky will be our control while I run Star Eater scales. As you will notice, I did miss a single shot with Golden Gun, so adding the damage I would have gotten from that perfect shot, it would be 789,000 damage, which also puts us into the realm of Gathering Storm as well. However, this does have a skill component added to it where Gathering doesn't. Just missing one shot loses around 63,000 damage if you don't hit a headshot. It is kind of sad to see that Celestial Nighthawk barely even competes with Star Eaters. That thing has fallen off the wagon so hard, hit its head on a rock, and is bleeding out in the sand. But oh well, I guess Star Eaters will pick up that mantle. Moving on, we're going to use 6-shot, and I'm aware that this does basically nothing in terms of damage. However, I'm going to be using every variant of every super, so on to 6-shot. And as expected, it's unremarkable. It's not a damage super, it's used for ad clear. Even so, I'm actually pretty impressed by it. It's managing to beat out Nova Bomb. Golden Gun will be gaining a 20% damage buff at the beginning of Season of the Deep, both 6-shot and 3-shot, so expect numbers in the range of 450,000 damage for 6-shot and 945,000 damage for 3-shot. Which puts it toe-to-toe with Blade Barrage on a good day. Pretty massive buff, so I'm glad I can finally use Golden Gun again. On to our final light instant cast super, that being Mobius Quiver. I won't be testing Deadfall as it's literally a single arrow from Mobius in terms of damage, so not even worth using. Mobius Quiver has an exotic paired with it called Orpheus Rigs, which allows for an extra volley of arrows, boosting the volleys you can shoot from 2 to 3. As for testing, once again, Star Eaters versus Orpheus, Desky is the control. Surprisingly, Orpheus Rig wasn't lagging too far behind, only around 60k less than Star Eater scales. It's actually pretty good, but I disagree with people saying, the damage is bad, it's a mid-tier super. The damage from this super isn't necessarily from the base damage, it's similar to T-Crash, where the damage you make up with weapons and abilities more than makes up for the low-tier damage. This also having the benefit of giving a 30% debuff for your entire team to use. It's pretty much god tier. If you don't have a tether on the team, it's definitely worth more than a golden gun, I'll say that much. Now, as for the final instant cast super in the entire game, that being Revenant. Revenant's damage comes from the Shattering and the Freezing Tornado, so the damage itself isn't going to be really good. It's going to be pretty lacking. Even with Star Eater Scales, which is a whopping 70% damage increase, we were only able to manage 283,000 damage. This also not stacking with other similar status-based supers like Gathering Storm makes it less than good. It's just plain bad. With that, we can now tally up the damage of every instant cast super and determine which is the best. We'll be starting from worst and going up, and I will be applying the Season of the Deep buff as well. Starting off at the bottom of the barrel, we have the trashiest super, that being Revenant at 280,000 damage. Above that, we have Nova Bomb Vortex with 350k, though this number can vary wildly due to the boss actually moving a lot or not. 6-shot Golden Gun up next with Star Eater Scales at 470,000 damage. Nova Bomb Cataclysm following that at 540,000. Tether with Star Eaters just barely crops above with 550,000. Thunder Crash at 700,000. Needle Storm just above that if you use all of your Threadlings at 750,000 and 800,000, variable depending on the threadling usage. Gathering Storm above that with a flat 800,000. Blade Barrage 900,000. Golden Gun 3-shot with Star Eater Scales at 946,000. And finally, Chaos Reach at 962,000 damage with Geomag. Something to note with the buff and Season of the Deep is that Jolting will now be in effect applied to Chaos Reach, so the damage could even go beyond what is here now. And that'll do it for all of our instant cast supers in the game. You still with me? Because we've still got around like half of the supers left. Those being the roaming supers. Same rules as before. If there's an exotic that will increase our damage, we'll be using it. If anything changes build-wise and fragment-wise, I will let you know. Once again, starting with Warlocks, we'll begin with Nova Warp, which sadly has no exotics that influences damage at all. We did 2 tests, one where we spam attacks without charging it at all, and another where we only did charge attacks. Without charging any of our attacks, we got 340 and 360,000 damage, which puts it in the realm of a pre-buff Nova Bomb. Not great. If we're using the super as intended and actually charging our attacks, it will give us around 640,000 damage if you manage to hit every attack. Basically proving that charging the attacks nearly doubles your damage output. Nova Warp will also be receiving a 15% buff with Deep's launch, putting it around 736,000 damage if you manage to hit all or most of your attacks. Definitely makes Nova Warp just a bit more worthwhile than it used to be. Next up, Dawn Blade. This one has been made fun of for literal years, but is any of it really justified? Short answer, sorta. With Dawn Chorus for Exotic and Ember of Ashes, we managed to break 700,000 damage. However, there's a bit of variance between. I'm not entirely sure what makes it so funky, seeing as I didn't really hit any immunes and still managed to do around 100k less in field. On a good day, it does around 30,000-ish damage less than Nova Warp, and in bad times, it barely even beats Nova Bomb, so there's a lot of variance between it. If there was really any time to buff Dawn Blade, it probably should have been now, and sadly it's not going to be getting any. Next up, we have Storm Trance, and it exists. Similar to Nova Warp, no exotics for this one that directly affect the damage without like a caveat, like Storm Dancer's Brace, which makes you kill stuff before you do damage. As expected, damage overall isn't going to be great, with it only hitting around 430,000 damage. However, Storm Trance is getting a pretty major buff in Deep, which will increase its damage by 25%, as well as lowering the damage ramp-up time so you'll have maximum damage faster. With this buff, we put ourselves within the range of 537 to 540,000 damage, somehow managing to still be worse than Nova Bomb post-buff. Kind of impressive. Onto our final roaming super for Warlocks, which is Shade Binder, and do I really need to speak on this one? Without any exotics, Shadebinder itself is pretty beyond bad, only managing to break like 330,000 damage just barely. That's pretty bad. Thankfully, we do have an exotic to push it just a little bit further, that being this thing with a really big name. This exotic doubles the shatter damage of your heavy attack, so if I had this exotic equipped and I say I hit 8 heavy attacks within my super, which is pretty generous given the timing, I would only be getting around 640,000 damage. This isn't taking into account people shattering the boss before I can, damage not being applied, and actually hitting that many attacks within a single super. Even with all that, we only managed to get 100,000 less than Nova Warp. I don't really want to hang on this anymore since it's kind of making me sad to think about. Thankfully, the super will be receiving a 10% buff, so that just barely pushes it past Dawnblade in terms of speculative damage. So it's something. Moving on from the depression-inducing supers of Warlocks, we have the GOAT supers that are tied to Titans. Titans have a majority of their super slots being roaming supers, so this'll be a while. Starting with Burning Maul, which has been considered to be the best super in the game for boss melting. Now, I gotta get something off my chest. When it comes to these Solar Titan supers, fuck the setup. Just by trying to get everything to align was an absolute nightmare. Legitimately took us like an hour to test 2 supers. It's so annoying. Enough rant. Damage time. We will be running Roaring Flames with Syntheseps for the exotic and aspect, seeing as Roaring Flames does affect your super damage as well. With all the prep finished, Burning Maul managed to break the glorious 1 million mark, which none of the supers we have tested so far have managed to do without a future buff or weird strat. I wasn't expecting to be impressed by Burning Maul, but I am happily surprised by its performance. Thumbs up, good job. As for Tiny Hammers, the setup was basically the same. Roaring Flames with Syntheseps, a couple extra things like Ember of Searing to give it more scorch, and once again, pleasantly surprised by how well this performed. After all the setup, it managed to break 860,000 damage, and even without a fully kitted out setup, you still managed to break 650k on a good day. Even with those impressive numbers, they will be receiving a buff in Deep if they couldn't get any better. Both Hammer of Soul and Burning Maul will be receiving a 10% damage buff, and Burning Maul will now apply Scorch with its Spin to Win attack, increasing the damage even further, especially if you have Ember of Ashes. So yeah, this one's going to be a bit of a monster in a couple of days. Alright, now that we're done with the heavy hitters, we can move on to everything else, starting with Sentinel. Sentinel doesn't have anything that directly gives damage, bonuses to the super. However, Doomfangs and Syntheseps do allow for a little bit of extra damage. With all that, we have around 400k damage with Doomfangs, assuming that you hit as much as possible. I wasn't expecting Sentinel to be good per se, but I wasn't expecting it to be worse than most instant cast supers. If we use Syntheseps instead of Dooms, we would get around an increase of 200,000, putting it at around 720,000 after the 20% buff in Deep, which will break Dawnblade just barely. Now we're on to the neglected child that is Fist of Havoc, and it's really bad. You only manage to get 330,000 if you manage to hit every shoulder charge in the super. That's not taking into account damage registration, which is horrible here. As far as buffs are concerned, this one is just getting overall improvements, some tuning to energy cost from attacks, damage on the heavy attack specifically, that sort of thing. Nothing good enough to make this better than any roaming super in the game at the current time. I am aware that there are some flaws in the way I tested this by using only shoulder charges, but at the current time, if you were to do all slams, you would get 5 slams in before you actually lost all of your super. So I don't think even with using the ramp up of the height in the slam, it would even break 330k on a good day. So I'm sorry, Fist of Havoc mains, you're gonna have to wait 3 years until Bungie remembers your super exists. Moving on from the sad state of Fist of Havoc, we have Behemoth, and Behemoth is fun. That is its purpose. Damage is not this super's bread and butter, however, there are a couple of ways to squeeze some fat damage out of this super. First being Whisper of Fissures, which increases the damage of stasis crystals. Crystals created by Behemoth also count as super damage when they explode, so they also receive the benefit of Perseus taking extra damage to them. Perseus is also so chunk that just by breathing on a crystal, they pop. So you can see where this will be going. Is it nearly practical at all? Probably not, but it can actually pump out some pretty insane damage if you get the positioning just right. In this test, we managed to break nearly 600 600,000, but by nature of this super being goofy, it could be a lot more or a lot less than we achieved. The super is receiving a buff, but it's not really doing anything other than increasing your light attack damage by 20% and reducing the cost of light attacks as well. So it's not going to do anything to change our damage significantly, but by nature of this super being a little inconsistent, it's kind of hard to place it anywhere. So I'm going to put it in the range of 650,000 to 700,000. If you were to spam heavy attacks, you would get significantly less than that. So I'm just going to put it there just for the sake of having a number to put on the board. Onto our final super for Titans, that being the new kid on the block, Strand. Once again, same setup, Synthos and a basic combo of 3 light attacks followed by 1 heavy attack. And with this, coupled with Syntheseps, Berserker is the second super we've tested to officially surpass 1 million damage. Absolutely juicy damage coming out of this one. It's made even better by how easy the setup is, where typically setup can be a little tedious and annoying on other classes. Sometimes a goblin just kamikazes itself into your hammer, or it walks away and you lose the buff. When you're doing damage, all you have to do is pop a barricade and suspend them, and that's all you need to do. Slap on the thread of continuity aspect and you get free 50% damage increase for your entire super. Probably the most free 1 million damage today. And now, finally, after everything, we're on to Hunters, our final class. Thankfully, we have significantly less roaming supers to wade through, only 3. Threadrunner, Arc Staff, and Spectral Blades, starting with the OG, that being Arc Staff. And it's kind of been power crept out of the game due to how powerful the newer supers have been. Exotics for this super will be, as usual, Star Eater scales, with the other being Raid and Flux, seeing as how dealing damage with Raid and Flux does increase your damage and gives more time within your super, so I'm kind of hoping it comes out on top with that increased time in your super. And it actually did, just barely though. Both Raid and Flux as Star Eaters managed to break 800,000 damage with just a gap of 15,000 between them, with the higher end being on Raid and Flux. Impressive to say the least. My only problem is that you will look like shit, seeing as Raid and Flux and Star Eaters are some of the worst looking and worst shading exotics in the game, and it legitimately makes me mad. Other than the fashion troubles that I have with it, it will be receiving a 20% damage buff, which will push it past the 950k mark. Glad to see one of the OGs back in power. Spectral Blades up next, and nothing beyond Star Eater scales to improve its damage. Nothing much to say beyond the fact that it's fucking ass. Actually putrid. Even with full Star Eater scales, the super only barely managed to break 375,000 damage. The super itself does pitiful amounts of damage and has some of the worst hit detection out of anything in the game, full stop. Legit, half of my slashes did 0 damage, and when they did, it wasn't even worth glancing at. Though it does have one saving grace, where this one will be getting the biggest super buff out of any of the ones we've tested yet, that being a whopping 35% damage increase, as well as triggering the weakened status effect when hitting an enemy with a heavy attack. Now, they don't mention how good the debuff is, whether it's a lowly 15% or a 30% debuff. Regardless, the super needs all the help it can get. With our scuffed damage numbers due to the poor hit registration, the super will only just barely break 500k, even with that 35% buff. Testing this super was about as painful as putting my dick in a pencil sharpener, so yeah, I'm not touching this thing ever again. On to our final super in the entire game, that being Threadrunner. Threadrunner, even after only 3 months, has had significant changes that made this super one of the best in the entire game. Previously, if you stuck a target at the very end of the rope when doing a light attack, it would cause the target to explode and do double damage, but they have since changed that because of some invisible damage bug. Now you will be receiving that explosion and double damage 100% of the time, meaning this super is just the most brain dead, easy damage I have ever witnessed. With Star Eater scales, you easily cross 1.3 million damage just by spamming left click. No effort required. So not only does it do the most damage out of any super in the game with little to no setup, it also will be the best damaging super in the game even after the wide range of buffs being applied in Season of the Deep. Like, this thing is just a fucking powerhouse. Alright, I'm done sucking the dick of Threadrunner. It's time to finally tally up the results from worst to best on the roaming supers that we have. Starting off with the trashiest of them all, Spectral Blades, absolutely fucking putrid. I hate this thing. Storm Trance, just barely creeping ahead. Then we have the three most speculative ones all hanging around the 700,000 damage mark, that being Dawn, Blade, Behemoth, and Shade Binder. It's very hard to get consistent results from these, so I'm just going to stick them on the 700k, seeing as that's kind of the range we received during our testing. Following the three of those, you have Sentinel hanging around 720k, followed by Nova Warp at 736k, Hammer of Soul breaking 900,000 at 946,000, Arcstrider 950, Berserker, Burning Maul, and Threadrunner all breaking the 1 million mark, with Threadrunner standing at the top at 1.3 million damage. If we were to compare every single super in the game, regardless of class, we would have this list right here. The worst of them all being Revenant, then we have Nova Bomb Vortex, then Needlestorm with no threadling usage, 6-shot Golden Gun, Spectral Blades, Storm Trance, Nova Bomb Cataclysm, Tether with Star Eaters, Dawnblade with Dawn Chorus, Thunder Crash with Kuros, Behemoth, and Shade Binder kind of hanging around that 700k mark, Sentinel pushing just past 720k, Nova Warp, the Needlestorm with Threadlings at 750 to 800,000 damage, Gathering Storm with Star Eater 800,000, Blade Barrage with Star Eater at 900,000, Golden Gun with 3 shots on Star Eater 946, Hammer of Soul 946 as well, Arcstrider 950, Chaos Reach Geomag, which is 962,000, Berserker 1 million, Burning Maul 1.1 million, and Threadrunner at 1.3 million. And with that, this video that has taken me nearly a month to finish is finally complete. This took me so long to finish, seeing as I have a full-time job as well as this video being absolutely massive. So a like or even you clicking the subscribe button would make it all worth it for me. This was super fun, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, check out the Discord in the pinned comment. Plenty of good stuff going on there. And yeah, I'm gonna go get some sleep. Goodbye.